Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are live right now in the CannaBuzz community. Welcome, everyone. We're so stoked to have our guest today. We have Mammoth Josie or Josey Heston from Mammoth Microbes and Growcentia. If you're not familiar with with that company, they make all kinds of great products like Mammoth Microbes and CannControl and all kinds of stuff that we'll be getting into today, as well as talking about the Oregon market and Josie's experience out in Oregon and all kinds of. Hopefully, we'll get some cool stories out of it too. So stay tuned for that. But before we go too far into the interview or into the show, I need to shout out a couple people real quick. Firstly, shout out to all of our CannaBuzz supporters that help make this show possible. Please join our CannaBuzz community by searching CannaBuzz in the App Store or go into your browser, go to cannabuzz.app, join our community, and use the code NEWYEAR for 50% off your first month. That support helps support the show. It's kind of like a Patreon and a community in one, so please check it out. We'd really appreciate your support. And then, of course, we need to shout out TikiMadMan. If you need some superior genetics, some great genetics that he's mixing up with all kinds of great seeds and strains out there. So please check out TikiMadMan.com. And I also have a special shout out, a note from here, a shout out to KingKongClones.com. JR, anything you want to say about them real quick?
Yeah, a lot of breeder cuts that are out there, a lot of really hard to find cuts. You can find them at King Kong Clones. They do discreet shipping. They do tissue culture on all the mothers before they take clones. And they also do testing on every batch of clones that they send out for viroids and all those other things we don't want. So yeah, check out KingKongClones.com, and you can also find them at King Kong Clones Discount on IG.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you to our supporters for helping make this show and our community possible. But now let's get into the interview. So today we are joined by Josie. We are so stoked to have her. She is Josey Heston. She's, or you may know her as Mammoth Josie on Instagram. She's from Growcentia. She's been with the company for years, and she's now the senior sales executive for the Pacific Northwest, which is in Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. She's all over the place on the West Coast. She's got a bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Florida, and she's been working with Growcentia to bring university-developed, environmentally responsible agricultural solutions to the market. Thank you so much, Josie, for joining us today. We are so stoked to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Thanks for that awesome introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I know we've been using Mammoth products for years, so I'm sure we're going to have a lot of interesting topics and discussions today. So JR, you can kick us off with that first question.
All right. Well, thanks, Josie. Thanks for joining us. We're super stoked to have you. I'm really excited to highlight your story and your journey. So that being said, kind of lead us into your introduction to the cannabis scene at whatever point you feel comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, no, sure. I used to like play around in my dad's greenhouses when I was a kid. So I guess it's always kind of been a part of my life. I would say my rebellious stage was when I was an anti-weed person. That was me rebelling from my family. I started coming out to the West Coast when I was in my later years in college, kind of just coming out for the summers, learning how to build switchbacks on mountains and learning how to put up hoop houses and stuff. And then, eventually about 12 years ago, I'd say, I made the move out here and just came out with a backpack and a tent and, was an official tremigrant, if you will, and kind of worked my way up as a trimmer to assistant grower to like head grower for different people on commercial farms in Northern California. That's where that whole journey started, was down in Southern Humboldt parts. And, I spent some time out in Hayfork area and the Trinity Mountains. And, I eventually ended up in the Siskiyous, which is really very, very Northern California, like right on the other side of the border. Most folks like to consider San Francisco Northern California, but that's central, to us folks in the real Northern California. I was on the Klamath River out there for about 3 or 4 years, doing the whole like off-grid homesteading thing, growing the cannabis. And yeah, I eventually after like 5 years of doing off-gridding and just being way out there, it was time for a change. And I moved up to Southern Oregon and ended up in like the Medford parts, and decided I was going to go ahead and try it out, like as a, getting into rec, because things were already like starting to shift. The whole time I had been doing that stuff, I was doing it for other people, so for me, like making that move to Medford was a chance for me to kind of like get out there and try it for myself and do my own thing. I had been used to managing like big teams of people, but always for somebody else. And by the time I got out there, man, it was like I had about a year before it was too late. Everything just kind of shifted. Yeah. So at that point, I was like, well, I don't really have the funds to like make it at this point. The property values in Josephine County and Jackson County, like within a year, just went insane after it went recreational. Like everything changed.
Yeah.
It was too late. And so I was like, I'll just make a name for myself as like a badass woman farmer, and like blow up my IG account, like try to brand myself and sell myself. And so that's what kind of landed me at a job at a big rec farm in Southern Oregon. Yeah. And
So
then
when was
Well,
that?
so-
What is that, like 2017-ish or something like that? Or
2017, you nailed
okay.
it. Yeah, 2017. I spent about a season out there, barely even a season. And that's what, towards the end of that is when I got introduced with Mammoth, basically. It was a
Cool.
big farm. There was about 20,000 plants out there. We had about 4 different tiers. I was co-managing one of those tiers with 3 other people. And yeah, it was one of the biggest grows in Oregon at the time, for sure. It was pretty insane. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I imagine it's just, as a grower, I'm always humbled by the growing experience, by all the different troubles and tribulations that you go through, and you think you've got it, and then something pops up and you have to deal with it. I'm sure that was just such an interesting experience going around and kind of being thrown into these big outdoor grows and just everything that comes with that. Sure, it was an interesting experience.
Oh, it was great. Yeah. And you're right. You do. I just want to, to feed off that a little bit. When you're farming and that's your job and your lifestyle, it's you knock one thing off the list and you're adding 3 more things onto it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it hurts, farming hurts for sure.
Yeah, it does. It does. Definitely does. I have a very tiny farm and it still hurts.
Yeah.
Tell us, kind of lead us into your hiring story with the Mammoth team.
Yeah, right. So that one's kind of fun. So I was working at that big farm, and then I had my medical grow in my backyard. It was pretty humble. And I had some friends who were going through a rough time and they needed a place to stay. So I was like, hey, you guys should just come stay with me. They had a 2-year-old, and so they were staying with me for a minute. And I was sitting next to my friend, and somebody had hit her up on Instagram. We were all friends from Dead Tour, from Dead shows, like little Wookiees, and one of their friends hit them up and was like, hey, do you guys know anyone who would want to meet a microbiologist? He's got this new product that they developed, and it's called Mammoth P, and they're trying to get plugged into Oregon. And, I had never heard of Mammoth at that point, but I was a total like microbe amateur enthusiast, soil rich tea brewing person. Like I was all about that kind of stuff. And so I was like, oh yeah, definitely. And that person was Erica Diener, and she used to be our rep for the whole East Coast. She was with us for a long time. So thanks, Erica. Shout out to Erica. But I was like, oh, absolutely, bring them here. And the microbiologist happened to be Colin Bell. So, Colin met me at the house, and I took him to my little backdoor medical hoop house grow and showed him that, and then took him to the big giant rec farm with 20,000 outdoor plants and a ton of people, and took him to a couple other farms around there. And he mentioned he took me out to lunch later, and that was really kind, just for kind of helping him get plugged in. and he mentioned they were looking for somebody out here to, manage sales and stuff. And so, I expressed some interest, and I took an interview, and they didn't get back to me for a really long time. So I just like started calling them over and over and over again and would not let it go, and I definitely was very aggressive about that. Yeah,
Good.
eventually, they brought me on the team, and here we are now.
That's rad.
Yeah.
That's cool. Like in this industry, we'd had some fire went up in the chat, so we got some love on those that story in our live stream chat. So that was cool. That's so cool. I think in this industry, since you're talking about 2017, 2018 time frame, which is 6 years ago, but we're still pretty early in this industry in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's cool to hear how you like made it happen and you were persistent, because I think that's what you need in this industry. Because speaking of trials and tribulations, there's so many different challenges that get thrown your way, and it's cool to hear that your persistence made this thing happen for you.
I mean, that's one key to success for sure. Is just having the persistence and the hunger. There's I will say 100% that's how I got to where I am today, is just by, being aggressive and persistent about things and asking for them. Nobody's going to give you anything, and that's for sure.
Totally.
Yeah, that's for sure. And like you said, I think it does take a strong desire. And one of the things we want to highlight, in this whole process here is exactly that in your journey and how you were able to overcome. Because I'm sure coming from switchbacks to the sales floor at MJ BizCon had to be quite the learning curve over time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but you guys, I think the next one we wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd love to. Well, I guess we'll talk about that kind of that transition from growing, and then you're on the sales side. So I'd love to just learn a little bit about that kind of transition, and who's your customer typically? Is it like the grow stores, or who do you typically work with? And I imagine just the skills that you had to kind of bring to the table, especially like empathy and listening and trying to understand like what the customer actually needs and how your product can fulfill those needs. I'm sure you brought a lot of skills to that position. So talk about that transition to sales at Mammoth, especially so early on for a product that no one's ever heard of, and you got to prove that this thing's actually worth it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there I can touch on. I mean, well, first of all, my back hurt. Like I said, farming's really hard. I'm just getting older. I saw the way things were going. I was, people were getting pushed out, and for me, I was just like, I latched onto that opportunity immediately because I, wanted something different, I guess, than what it was becoming. What I was able to bring to the company, I think, was being a cultivator, being one of their customers. And for a new company who's trying to make it, and having somebody in sales with that perspective, that's a big value point, because a lot of what I realized when I became a rep is that a lot of the reps did not have the commercial, real growing experience that I had. Like, they had grown, but like a few plants in the backyard. They had never lived years as that was like their subsistence base. That was how they made their money. If you failed for a season, you were screwed. I mean, like, what are you going to do if your crop fails? Like, that was terrifying for growers, and just being able to bring that real life experience of like, they're, especially with Oregon, where it's like a big time commercial industry, and things were just starting to take off. And it's like, my water, I have 15,000 gallon water tanks here, like, we're going to have to, I don't know, so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, that was, something I was able to bring, but
Yeah.
what I didn't have was, like, everyone knew everybody. There was like, I didn't know who the breeders were. I didn't know who the stores were. I didn't know who the managers and the owners were. I was so disconnected, just being an off the grid hill person, that my first show I ever did after being off the grid for like 5 years was MJ BizCon. And that was like 2 weeks after I got hired.
Wow.
So like, it was like I had just been like, you know, and I'm from Tampa, like I grew up in Tampa, so I know what a city's like, but when you're removed for that long, it's like you're like, what are all these lights? You know, like what's that, an elevator? Like what's one of
Yeah,
those? It was crazy experience. I had to learn really quick. And part of it was like a fake it till you make it thing, you know,
totally.
as far as that kind
Yeah.
of thing goes. But I don't really like to use that term too much because you do eventually like have to learn it or you'll lose it. So um
And,
but
and
yeah.
what about sorry, what about some of the personal growth and changes that have happened over your experience with Mammoth and Growcentia?
Oh yeah, that's Mammoth took a risk on me. Like I had no sales experience other than waitressing. Really, I've always been a back of the house type of person.
Yeah.
But I feel really confident to say that they took a risk and they turned it into an investment. And for that, I am incredibly grateful for. Like working for a startup company is one of the funnest things ever. It really is just like there's so much flexibility there and so much creativity and imagination, and the space for that is allowed in a startup company. And so I'm just so grateful for that. It was the most exciting, thing to be a part of, and for such a company with a product that had such high integrity. I just want to say, like, they allocated the patients with me that contributed to much of the professional confidence I have today, for sure. Like I am 100% not the same person I was when I started. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So now that you've been a rep for a while, I'm sure you've seen some pretty crazy stuff. Can you tell us some of the more crazier stories that you've come across being a sales rep for Mammoth?
I mean, I wish I had like really crazy stuff to tell you. I feel like you'd get better stories out of the SoCal rep or, the East Coast rep. Like Oregon's pretty laid back. And the PNW is pretty chill. But I'll tell you like some cool things that happened to me that, I guess like I got to meet really cool people that I had only ever read about before. Jeff Lowenfels, for example, I'd always been a big fan of his books. So to meet him, it was like meeting a celebrity. And, it's fun to like,
Yeah.
I'm always running into Jeff at airports and we're trying to get pictures every time we see each other at the airport. But that became like a fun thing for a while when trade shows were still, pretty active, was running into people like that consistently and developing those relationships. Yeah. I guess the craziest
Yeah.
thing, I did have this note, which like the first year I went to MJBizCon, we hadn't even set up yet. We were all just standing out there, we were smoking weed, and we almost got kicked out before it even started. My first year,
Oh my
me and some
God.
other reps for smoking outside of MJBizCon, and that would define crazy for me, I guess.
Yeah, it would.
Before we move on to the next topic, I did want to I'm fascinated about kind of the this sales experience, I guess, on your end, and that question that I asked earlier about like who are you selling to?
Oh yeah.
Is it often kind of the managers of grow stores or whatever? And I guess where
Right.
I'm kind of where part of where I'm coming from is here in the States at least, there was a decent amount of like consolidation. Grow Gen, I think in particular, right, is the store. They bought up the stores near me. And so I imagine it's been an interesting changing landscape for you over these like 4 or 5 years, 6 years now. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so we sell to, my primary customers are the retailers.
Yeah.
That's what our product is sold from. So my customers, my clients are the retailers. However, part of my tactic as a salesperson, because I come from the background of being a commercial cannabis cultivator, is, I reach out to cannabis commercial cultivators and I go to farms and I, try to filter all that business through the retailers. So, because
Oh, cool.
ultimately our end product is the grower,
Yeah.
so it's, as long as we're all working together and being transparent, there's a lot of opportunity that can happen when you work with your retailers like that. So that's
Yeah.
been a good tactic for me, is just getting out there and getting FaceTime with the growers and going to farms and, consulting with them and helping them dial in product and all of that. But ultimately, they're purchasing from the retailers. Like,
Yeah.
those are the people that I am, ultimately selling to.
That's really cool. So you build the
Yeah,
demand from, and you're also helping bring more sales to that retailer, right? Because this is a
that's
product.
the
I don't.
goal.
Yeah, is Mammoth P often like releasing some other product that they're using it, or is it an additional product? Because at that point, you're actually bringing even more revenue to that store, in a new kind of product that person is now purchasing from them on a regular basis.
For sure. Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, is to drive business in there. If we
Yeah,
can get them to come into the store for our product, then maybe they'll buy something else there as
yeah,
well.
that's really
But
cool.
that's been the GrowGen thing is, that's a lot, we're losing out on a lot of those local businesses, but GrowGen has been hiring, local people to fill in those roles, but it is, the surface of things is changing for sure. And
Yeah.
online, like e-commerce has been a problem too. And Mammoth's unique. We don't work with distributors. So, on the cannabis, like, we're not working with distributors there like a lot of other
Right.
companies. So there's a lot more negotiating power you can have with your retailers and stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sounds like a lot of relationship building that you're
I mean,
doing.
that's all it is. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like we don't have a client and then make a sell and then never talk to them again. It's all
Yeah.
about maintaining those relationships. And if they're not using the product anymore, why? And let's try to figure that out. And yeah, I mean, we're constantly like trying to come up with new things to release, and so
Yeah.
keep your eyes open, everybody.
Well, let's see. Let's get into well, we can talk about the Mammoth products, right? That's what we were just about to jump into, JR.
Actually, I think we were going to talk a little bit more about the
Oh,
schedule, the travel schedule
yeah.
required for this job at its busiest. Let people know who are thinking about getting into the industry in this fashion. Let them have an idea of what the travel schedule is like when it gets crazy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as a cultivator, you're out there in the sun, and or maybe not in the sun, depending where you're at, but you're moving your body, you're moving around, and you're strong and fit and stuff. And now that, I'm doing sales, it's a lot of sitting and it's a lot of driving, and that's a definite shift. And I think that people, our schedule, we have a lifestyle that seems kind of glamorous on Instagram and stuff like that. But, the reality is the schedule can get pretty intense, especially with all the traveling. There's times where, I mean, if we have to do vendor days or events on the weekend, like, we don't get to take the weekdays off, and there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. For everything that we're out doing and all the connections we're making, it's our duty to, log those calls and log those leads and keep these things recorded, and we have to do all that at the end of the day. At the end of a big 3-day event, like, we have to come back and, we're on the computer for days, like, following up and, making things happen. And, after a while of being on the road and staying at nice hotels and eating nice dinners and stuff, you start to miss your bed, and you want to just, drive a couple extra hours and sleep in your own bed at night. And I mean, the first year I definitely took advantage of that stuff more. And as the years, I've been with the company a little over 5 years now, and my expenses have become more and more just beef jerky at the gas station. That's beef jerky and kombucha. That's what I spend most of my money on, probably, when I'm on the road. No, but
That's
there's,
funny.
a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Yeah. I mean, there's times where I don't get home till 8 or 9, and I still have, multiple days worth of things to log. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, well, now we'll dive into Growcentia and everything that you've got going on over there. Sorry for jumping the gun there for a second. So let's talk about Growcentia and kind of your approach to developing products. I think it's super interesting. I became familiar with you guys with Mammoth P, but then later on you had CannControl and all these interact in interesting ways and really different ways. So could you talk a bit about that? I guess maybe starting with Mammoth P, and you could also just again talk about kind of what is Growcentia's approach to their products.
Right. So I would say our approach is basically like we're targeted and specialized and simplified, right?
Yeah.
So we'll start out with Mammoth P. That's our flagship product. Mammoth P, the easiest way I can describe it for people who don't know what it is it's a probiotic for plants. So it does for plants what probiotics do for people. The P stands for phosphorus, hence Mammoth P. So now I would say, like, you would ask yourself, when is phosphorus valuable? The entire life cycle of the plant. There's 3 value points of using phosphorus. During early root production, you're going to get faster roots and increased root biomass. During early vegetative stage, what you're going to see is a decreased interval stacking. So for like super sativa plants or plants that tend to get like really stretchy, it's really valuable to use Mammoth during veg for those specific types of strains. And then during bloom, what we see is that increase in yield, right? It's about a 16 to 20% increase in yield on average. It's a functional based microbe, but I think that the backstory of Mammoth P is really interesting. It kind of gives you an idea of like who we are and what we're doing. So what I like about this company is that they didn't just develop a product and get into the cannabis space. They were soil microbiologists at Colorado State University who were looking into algae blooms. And, one of the major contributors to algae blooms is from phosphorus runoff from big agriculture. So it's a company that identified a problem and is looking for a solution. And that's like how this whole company was born. And it started with Mammoth P, but that's the root of it, is they were identifying a problem in the environment and they wanted to find a solution. And I think that's really unique and that's really cool. And that problem was, so algae blooms, the number one contributor to that is from phosphorus runoff from big agriculture. And the reason is because plants have a very difficult time uptaking phosphorus. They can only normally uptake about 20% of it. So what these guys did is they collected soil samples from all over the United States and developed a trait selection platform. And they were looking for a function. That function was to cycle phosphorus. What persisted are the 4 strains of bacteria in Mammoth P existing at relative abundances together. So independently, those strains of bacteria weren't, they're everywhere. They weren't serving that function, but altogether existing at those CFU levels, they maximized phosphorus availability and outcompeted any other consortia from the samples that were collected by our team. So then this is where it gets like really cool. They then took that consortia and they raised it in an environmentally stressed out condition. So they put environmental pressures on them and allowed them to repopulate, put those pressures on them again and allow them to repopulate, basically selectively bred. And it was 30 generations later that the microbes were like, this is as far as we go. And because of that process, you can use Mammoth with salts and synthetics. You can put them through emitters and drip lines. You can use them in all sorts of ways that you can't use a lot of other microbes, which is really great for commercial cultivators who, a lot of them are using salts and synthetics. And so, a lot of that stuff is killing natural microbes in the environment who can't withstand those heavy salts. And Mammoth P is a microbe that you can incorporate into your routine, and you don't have to worry about that. And you don't have to worry about the runoff that you're going to cause from your plants not being able to properly metabolize the nutrients that you are using. Yeah.
So it's not really so much that the phosphorus isn't there. It's the delivery of the phosphorus that is the solution. So like for a lot of different growers, if they have a base program, they're probably going to have plenty of phosphorus in their mix or in their program. But in order to make it available to the root zone for that kind of exchange, that's where Mammoth P comes in and makes that delivery possible.
Exactly. And the thing is, people don't need as much phosphorus as they think they do anyway. You know, it's just that that's where our
Right.
fruits are at, that's where our flowers are at, that's where our money's at, right? And so people want to just pump it and pump it. They want to use high phosphorus inputs, and that's not really the way that it works. You know, it's you got to have the microbes in there to break those nutrients down to begin with. You know, it's more efficient and it's better for the environment that way. And it's going to make your product taste better too. You know, you see a lot
Agreed.
of people who convert to salts, and a couple of years later, they come back and slowly start integrating more microbials and organics back into their regimen to get those flavors back and those terpenes back.
Agreed. Agreed. So, give us a brief overview of some of the other products that have been added on to the lineup since the Mammoth P has hit the market.
Yeah, so we've got some new stuff out. It's really exciting. I'll go into like the one that was released right after Mammoth was our CannControl, which a lot of people are starting to become familiar with that. CannControl is a pesticide and fungicide. It targets mites and thrips, aphids, whiteflies, fungus gnats, and powdery mildew. What's great about CannControl is that it has multiple uses. You can use it as a soil drench. Not everyone knows that, but it's really effective for fungus gnats. Also, we have some pretty good SOPs for root aphids as well. And then you can use it as just a regular plant dip before you transplant, you know, soak the root ball in there and flip it over. So multiple uses. Again, to get back to what our company products are kind of based on is specialized, targeted, and simplified. CannControl is not just generic. It's made from thyme oil, but not just generic thyme oil. It's specialized. It's made from thymol. So they isolate the compounds in thyme that actually have an impact on the bugs and the fungus, and mix it in with some corn oil. It's got oleic acid, so you don't have to add soap. So it's really user friendly. But yeah, it's more specialized, more targeted that way. And then our third product that we released was Mammoth Silica. So Mammoth Psi is a monosaccilic acid. The difference between monosaccilic and potassium silicate is that it's readily available. Potassium silicate takes weeks to become available for plants. So it's great for perennials. You know, it makes sense for perennials, but for annuals, it just doesn't really make as much sense. And cannabis is an annual plant with a short life. And so really, if you're growing cannabis, it's more efficient to be using a monosaccilic acid. Our monosaccilic acid is a low nitrogen one, so you can use it all the way through bloom. You don't have to switch up. It's got a very low heavy metal listing, so it runs really clean. And it's only 0.5 ml per gallon of water. But silica is what it does for the plants is that it builds up the cellular wall. So it fills in all those gaps that normally are going to be occupied by pest and disease. So it's a built-in pest and disease resistance. It's going to help your plants pick or better uptake micronutrients, and it's going to give them added flexibility. It's really great for anybody who's trying to do a sea of green type technique. You're going to have less broken branches. Yeah, people who like to manipulate their plants, house plant people, you're going to notice it like right away. And then more added support for your plants, so you don't have to get out there and put quite as many posts, if you're doing like outdoor growing. I do want to say something for outdoor cultivators, like a really high value point of using silica is what it does to help your plants withstand environmental pressures. So, the climate becoming more unpredictable, it helps your plants deal with all of those unpredictabilities way better. Things like drought, things like, if we're going through, a 3-digit heat wave, if there's going to be a hailstorm or, a freeze that's coming up, and, if the rains come early that year, like stuff like that, your plants are going to be way better equipped to handle those adversities than they would without it.
Very cool.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I've noticed that like you said, it allows me to scrog. So whenever I'm bending and training and I first go in under the scrog, that can be a really kind of tense time because you don't want to snap or break. And I notice not only does it give me flexibility, but it also gives me strength in the leaves. and in the
Right.
petioles as well. Like when I go to pluck around day 18 of flower, I pinch,
Mhm.
the petiole off, and I can tell how strong it is from the silica.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that, like in times like you said, I've had power outages in the middle of winter where I went 4 days without power or heat,
Mhm.
and they were able to withstand that without, it looked like very little detriment at all.
Yeah.
And I think that it really helps with the overall um, health and ability for the plant to, like you said, not only resist pest pressures, but like in the case of powdery mildew, it toughens up the leaves and makes it harder for that hyphae to get down into the leaf and inoculate the plant with PM. And so,
Bad
yeah, there's a lot of
bacteria
benefit.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of benefits. And have you ever heard of people using silica as a foliar at all? That was one of the questions I had.
Yeah, I've done research on it too, and I've read that it's the preferred way that plants like to access silica. But we have, our own team of R&D, and all the tests that we've ran, we were surprised to see that the plant had more success with feeding it as a like into the soil rather
Yeah.
than using it as a foliar. However, I always say there's as many ways to do this as there are people doing it, and what works for this person might not work for this person. And it's the same exact environment, not exact, but there's
Right.
variables. That's the issue here, right? And
Totally.
so if anyone would like to try our product as a silica, our recommended dosage is between 2 and 4 milliliters per gallon of water. So, just basically the same standard that pretty much every other monocyclic is measured at. You can feel comfortable using ours at that if you would like to try that out.
And how often are you adding it? How often are you feeding that?
At least once a week,
Okay.
like it's if a lot of indoor cultivators will apply it twice a week.
Huh.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk about can control. I appreciated your notes or things that you mentioned earlier about outdoor growing because I try to get in most of my growing every year outdoor in my backyard. I'm in the Bay Area. I appreciated your note earlier about we're actually kind of more like North Central Coast than the NorCal in relation to how huge this state is.
Yeah.
But anyways, with outdoor growing, I deal with like all kinds of random stuff, and every single year it's like a new thing. I have a new issue, a new problem, and so I've been using Can Control to really help me with a lot of the issues that I deal with pests and you were talking about PM and stuff like that. So could you talk, I guess, just for a second before we move on, about can control and how people use that outdoors and how because one of the things I liked about it is I can still use it into flower a bit. I don't have to like end it right when I start flower.
Right. Yeah, that is a value point of our product. You can use it all the way. I mean, we've done research in our greenhouses where we've used it all the way through and it hasn't had an adverse effect on the
Cool.
plants. We don't know how it's going to affect the taste and the flavor.
Yeah.
And so we always recommend to pull back the last 4 weeks. But that is one of the value points is that you can use it all the way through. Like if you get into one of those dire situations, and hopefully you don't. But compared to other oil-based products, you can use it longer into the flowering cycle than others for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
then,
because when we're getting into flower in that August, September-ish time
yeah.
frame, right? That's when I'm starting to get aphids or like all of a sudden
Mhm.
thrips are showing up or whatever. And that's where I found can control to be super helpful during that July, like August time frame.
Yeah. And then the thing is that those aphids and those bugs are dropping eggs early on into your soil. And so if you're going to pull it off your flower, what you do is you just start applying it into your soil because you can use it in your soil as a soil drench the whole way through flower. And you're going to basically, you know, target those bugs before they even hatch. And that's because that's what's happening is they're dropping in there and then they're hatching and then it's just creating this whole cycle. So and then for folks who are growing indoors or in hoop houses and stuff, what you can do is spray it around the plants, like just create around the walls and stuff like that. It's still creating a nice like perimeter around them, even if you have to pull back that last 4 weeks.
Cool. I really
It's
appreciate
funny you
those
say that.
tips.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I've used it for exactly that purpose. I had a
Nice.
situation. Seems like around the end of every summer, somehow thrips find it into my garden, and so I used it to treat them. But I also treated the floor, and because I have a concrete floor and a wall, I also treated the floor as
Mhm.
well, and a little bit on the wall, lower part of the walls, just to make sure nobody was going to be able to, repopulate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't even think about their fans and stuff, you know, and like the
Yeah.
duct systems, and that's where a lot like the filters, and that's like, bugs get stuck in there too, and they propagate inside.
Yeah. Yeah, I've used it to clean my grow tent a bit too. That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a note here about we're going to talk about Southern Oregon and just kind of what's going on in the scene there. So let's talk a little bit about there was an interview with a guy named Aaron Getty about legacy growers and gentrification and what's going on down there. Let's dive into that topic. What's going on in Southern Oregon these days?
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. I just want to make a note because there's a couple points about our products that I do want to go back
Oh,
on.
cool. Yeah,
And we have
let's
a
do that.
couple.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Well,
yeah.
I wanted to just mention one thing that's really cool about monocyclic acid that I learned. And it's that what JR, you were talking about, how you noticed it was just helping wounded parts of your plant. So the plant's relationship with silica is that when it has an injured area, it will send that silica right to that injured spot and address it. So it has this really cool symbiotic relationship. And then just one more note about Mammoth P, being a product that you can mix with, pretty much any product out there. There's a lot of misconception about using Mammoth P with Athena. And so I wanted to address that since I had this platform real quick. We've actually done studies because we were concerned about that. And we have found that, at their recommended dosages, you can run our product with theirs. And that's because of that selective breeding process that I was talking about earlier, how we raised mammoth in those conditions and allowed it to repopulate. It's a really strong microbe. In the test that we have run, we have an SOP to run with Athena, so Athena cleanse specifically. So if anybody has any questions on that, like feel free to get in touch with me through Instagram or my email or whatever. And before we stop on the products, we have a couple more I have to mention before we go
Cool.
on.
Yeah.
We also have starter plugs, which are really unique in that there's only a 2% binder in there. So they break apart just like a brownie. I can give you guys a little demo at the end of this if there's time. That's like our differentiator in the market is that they're completely compostable, California standard, which is really hard to get. But they're 50% peat moss, 50% cocoa, and there's a little bit of perlite in there and cocoa biochar for added porosity.
Wow.
So they're really nice and airy, almost like a soil blend already. And our newest addition is Mammoth Myco. It's our mycorrhizae. It's water soluble and it's got rhizobacteria in there as well. A big differentiator for us is that we measure it by the spores rather than propagules, which is a superior way to measure mycorrhizae. It gives a truer definition of what actually is in there. Propagules is a little bit of filler information. And so again, it's just kind of like our style is to be like more simple, more targeted and more specialized. We're kind of staying on trend with all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into both of those actually because those both sound really cool. So what were the first product, the grow cubes? Those sounded really neat. What was the name of them again?
They're mammoth starter plugs.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
And
this
a
is
lot of
totally,
people
yeah.
like you can't see them, so that creates loud.
Live demo.
Yeah.
And and so that those will insert into like a clone dome, the
There's
tray
no
will, or
dome, but you get a propagation tray and you get the tray that the plugs come in. They're deep celled too.
Oh,
See how nice
cool.
and big that is? They
nice.
come right out. You guys get eyes on that?
Yeah.
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 And you see that little bit of perlite in there?
Oh, wow. That's like you just
Yeah.
said, you can just totally break that
Check
up like a
that out.
brownie.
It's like a brownie.
Dude, that's cool.
That's amazing.
there's dirt all over my ground because I'm a plant person. So yeah, they're pre-soaked too, so it takes out that labor additive. If you're a commercial cultivator, that's how we've gotten a few people to switch over from rock wool that way.
Yeah.
But you have to be growing on a pretty large scale before that makes sense, I would say.
Oh, and yeah. I would love, that's really cool because I get clones. I'm in NorCal, like I said earlier. So sometimes I get clones from dispensaries, Dark Heart Nursery clones, and those are always in rockwool. And then I'm recycling my soil and stuff, and I find these little rockwool cubes, and stuff.
Yeah.
And I would love it if people switch to stuff like that. And I'm glad that
Yeah.
you talked about that because I was literally last night going through all my stuff, looking about how I wanted to start my seeds or clones and stuff. That's a really cool product. Where can people check that out if they want to grab it?
They should be able to pick them up at their local retailer. If
Uh-huh.
they're not there, just let them know that, make a request for it, or they can reach out to me and I can try to get like an order in for them. Yeah, they're registered everywhere. So, if you guys have any questions about that, you can go onto our website and look at where to buy. We do have a tag for that if you guys
Cool.
can't find it. Yeah.
Nice. And then the microbes, here, JR and I, we both love microbes. We both use microbes on all our stuff and different forms. So I'd love to just nerd out about that for a second. So is that like a powder that you're adding into your water?
Mhm.
How often are people using it? And when do people use it in their growing, let's say, cycle? Or is it, during just veg and a little bit into flower? How does that work for folks?
I think that, it's just it's subjective to the cultivator, but obviously you want to get those microbes in for propagation. Especially mycorrhizae. It's a very important time to have that additive in there. And we recommend using it once a week, like through the life cycle, or once like as needed, basically. Some people prefer to use mycorrhizae all the way through bloom. Some people like to use it once during early propagation and then use it again during veg, and then that's it. That's kind of how mycorrhizae works. It multiplies within the media and it becomes its own, loop fed system.
And so, can you talk a little bit about the moisture level of the medium required to keep the biological living action going?
Right. I mean, a lot of folks will want to like let their pots dry all the way out,
Yeah.
and that's where the debate comes in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, is it
So
harmful to have those long dry backs? Do you want to have less of a dry back when you're trying to keep your population of microbes consistent and interacting with your root zone?
when we're talking about mycorrhizae specifically,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So with Mammoth P, that's a different topic. With the
Oh, interesting.
mycorrhizae, yeah, again, that's a subjective thing. I prefer to let things dry out and then to reapply.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
Oh, so as you're reapplying, you're re-inoculating those populations and keeping that kind of count higher as you're reapplying.
it's the count you kind of nailed on, right? It's like if you're trying to keep your microbes at a specific count, then that process would make sense for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Excellent, excellent. So yeah, as we were moving on, we kind of are teasing the interview that we have coming up with Aaron Getty and the Southern Oregon Co-op. So we were wanting to kind of touch on that gentrification of these legacy growers. And you've been a part of that Southern Oregon, Northern California scene for years now. Can you kind of talk about how that has all kind of played out and kind of give us the landscape for that whole area and the whole thing?
Yeah, that's it kind of ties into like why I got into sales to begin with. It circles back to all that stuff we were talking about before, getting pushed out and stuff. a lot of the legacy growers that I know that are still down there, personally, are people who are out in the woods, disconnected, not plugged in, the old man on the hill type of thing. And then there's the people who have been pushed out or they've become burnt out. And then there are those who have stayed steadfast and are determined to weather this storm and get through it. And that's where Aaron Getty comes in, and, what he's doing is really interesting. And, he's part of that collective Southern Oregon farmers, Southern Oregon Family Farms. And, they're a co-op that's trying to basically, fight the gentrification. They're just trying to exist is what it comes down to. Like, they're simply just trying to exist. And, that's a problem. It's unfortunate that it's a challenge for people who have been down there for so long and doing this for 10 or 20 years, and they're struggling to just exist, and that's all they want, which seems so simple. I'm really excited for you guys to have him on. I think that's going to be a great bit for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to really kind of with our podcast, we're not just about growing, we're not just about breeders. We're about the voices of the cannabis community. And like I've said in past episodes, our cannabis community is very fragmented right now. And if we're gonna go the mile, and if we are gonna sustain and last, the sooner we can get unified and the sooner we can get together to start taking back what we lost, the better off we are. So we're really thankful for you for referring Aaron, and I'm really excited to get that story told.
Yeah, it's really important story to be told. There is, there's craft beer, there's craft wine, there's craft chocolates, and I'm hoping that we can figure out how to eventually get craft cannabis and have it positioned in a way that protects the people who have been fighting for a long time, and Aaron Getty's been a huge part of that. He's been a big organizer for folks down there for years now, even before this little co-op that he's, a part of.
Yeah.
That's going to be like the only thing that saves us, is to, openly collaborate with each other, rather than
I agree.
people, competing. And the cooperative has worked for a long time for farmers, so
Yeah.
I hope they can figure out a way to, really establish fair trade down there. I think that's
Totally.
the next move for Southern Oregon, Northern California cultivators, who
Yeah.
are just trying to exist.
Yeah, here what I've seen here in NorCal that inspires me is more of the community of growers coming together. And like one of my favorites is there's a distributor, and they've been finding these great NorCal farms, and they're just making sure that, as they say, the weed gets down the mountain and the weed goes down to the mountain to the stores, and that
Yeah.
the good gets to the people, as they say. And I think it's really teaming up. And I also just wanted to make a comment too, is like, this is a timely discussion where this week that we're recording this, Curaleaf, one of the biggest multi-state operators in the country, or in the world, if you will, just announced that they're bailing on California and Oregon and one other market.
Oregon, yeah.
Yeah, so so that's jobs lost and all these other things that are lost, but it also just shows that these big companies that everyone, hypes up, and there's all this kind of smoke and mirrors around, they're not necessarily built to last and here to stay, and they definitely don't care about the cannabis community. So it's up to all of us to keep the fight on and keep pushing.
It's a lifestyle, and that was one of the more like humorous parts about the 2018 collapse to me, is you had all these people come out who were like, oh, cannabis, and they put all this money into stuff, and then they're like, oh, farming is hard and it hurts and I'm sore and I'm not getting anything for my product. And so they left. And it really comes down to like it's a lifestyle, and there's the people who are just, this is their lives, and they don't really have a choice, like this is what they do, and they will stick it through, and they'll still be here, and you know they want to make it through the storm because they love what they do. It's a labor of love at that point, and I think that's what makes the difference for sure.
And speaking of that, can you kind of just kind of give people an image or like a overview of what that time prior to all this legalization was like? What was it like for these farmers and these producers back then who were, for the most part, providing a big portion of our country with cannabis?
Right. Yeah. So the pros to that lifestyle, I would say, like, from my perspective and my experience, were the lifestyle. You could be a homesteader and live in the mountains, but also have an income. And that was something really special. You could leave, you could travel, you could have like a nice like winter vacation after busting your ass all summer on the hill. You could escape the rat race, you could unplug from society, you didn't have to be a part of it, you didn't have to be on Instagram, or you didn't have to be branded or market yourself or sell yourself. You could just raise your chickens and raise your rabbits and live your life. You could work for yourself. Sure, you were still ruled by the weather and the plants, right? Like they dictate everything, but you could be a trimigrant, everyone loves that word. Geez, like I don't think that's really a thing anymore so much, like you can make a whole career off just coming out and trimming for a season. Like that doesn't really exist anymore. People can just come out for a season and trim and then travel the rest of the year. And then there's a whole demographic of folks who did that. It created opportunity. I would say it kind of reflected like the fairer parts of capitalism. Like it created a more leveling, the playing field was more level in those days, I'll say. You still had people who come from a lot of affluence who, are always going to have more opportunities than people who only, who don't. Like when you come from poverty, you only have a couple chances for success in your life. If you have money, you have unlimited amounts of chances for success, but the playing field was more even then. After it became recreational, it was just like, even like the rich people who came in from out of town, like they were even washed out. Big business can afford to fail is the thing. People who are just a little bit rich can't. And that's where we'll get into kind of like, the cons of it becoming rec is it kind of reflected capitalism at its worst, like back in the day, you could start from the bottom, become a trimmer and work your way up and maybe have a farm one day. But like I said, like by the time it went rec, we had like after 1 year, that was impossible for even people who were pretty well established. Like it just was insane. And, the taxes that are placed on these cultivators, these licensed growers, is completely unsustainable. So the ones who have made it, it's very, very challenging for them to come up because the taxes placed by the state are not they're not a function of market changes, right? So the market goes south and the taxes don't change, and that's a problem for the cultivators who don't have a lot of backup. They don't have big investors and big business backing them up. But when you have somebody who can afford to fail for 3 years in a row, like, and that's kind of what's happened in some situations, there's a lack of protection for small businesses. Monopoly is the goal of, this whole thing. And so what's happening is these big businesses are, merging and making acquisitions of other farms going out of business. And the best we can hope for is that farmers cooperatize down there and buy up all those farms before a big business can, and I know some farms down there who are trying to do that. They're not anywhere near as like big time as a corporation, a big giant corporation, but they're doing the best they can. What happened was people who used to get paid like really well, like, they just started stealing their intellectual property rights, like basically like all of our recipes for all of, how we grew the great weed. Like, go work for a big farm and don't share that stuff with them necessarily, because once they have that content, like, you might get fired, and somebody else who's going to work for $5 less than you an hour is going to be hired real quick. So yeah, the owners stealing IPRs from growers was like a huge thing, because all the farmers make a deal on a handshake is the thing. And I think we all got so used to that, just solidifying a deal with a handshake, that like when that like different type of business mentality came in, a lot of people got burned really bad because they were just naive and honest, and it was really sad, so those were the cons. I'll say what we needed though was regulation. These are the pros of it being a rec market, is that we have regulation now. Like, we don't have to worry about people growing with toxic chemicals as much. Like, people have more of a transparency on what it is they're putting in their body. And I think that's really important, because I've seen a lot of, ill practices out there when people get desperate not to lose their crop, partly because there's no there wasn't farmers insurance. Research is another positivity that's come out of recreation. All the research we've been able to do, learning about all the different cannabinoids, it's so exciting and so awesome. And then access, the fact that anyone can go into a dispensary these days in most states and get cannabis is so cool. I'm from Florida, where if you got caught with a roach or a seed in your car, you were facing serious time, and I just went down there for Christmas and went into the dispensary with my dad, and that blew my mind. Being able to do that kind of thing is beautiful, and we should have that, but we need to protect the farmers as well, and there needs to be fair trade and transparency.
Well, I think that one thing also with the pros of rec is people stopped going to jail as much.
Exactly.
So obviously
That's probably number one.
Yeah. And then and the other thing about the taxation, with the overtaxation and zero representation, without accessibility to financing and banking, it's really, I almost wonder if it's almost by design for failure, in that we have overtaxation, we have a product that's racing to the bottom, and in many situations, people have picked up predatory lending practices in order to sustain or be alive in this market. And so those are the things that I think we need to start pushing back on. And I also want to bring up the point, like you said, about craft growers and having a product that's accessible and that is safe. Here in Oregon, we had that all set up with the medical program. We had dispensaries where they had products available in every town. Everything was tested and regulated before it got to the shelf. And the local community thrived because the local money went back to the local community. Where now in a rec situation, that's maybe not the case, where a lot of that corporate money might be going to people who, like you said, and like Q said, don't really have much love for the plant or our people. So I think that whole story, and I think that's a huge part of what we're doing, is trying to bring that story to light. And that's why I really appreciate you coming on and being so honest and open about the whole situation, because some people might be afraid to speak out and be honest and share information. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of
Thank you.
course. Thank you guys for having me on. I think it's important to talk about, it's sad to see the amount of people who started this thing who are getting, swept under. I really hope to see people come together, and that's really what it comes down to. Like, we have a really great community here. We're really strong, especially on the West Coast. Like, there's something really special out here, and it just takes coming together, I think, to really solidify that and withstand all of this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we telling stories and helping people understand the human side of this, the humanity, because a lot of this, it feels abstract, right? Like if you just remove the human parts of these stories, and you just look at it in terms of stats or a spreadsheet or whatever, you can become really disconnected from it. So I think it's important, like you've been sharing those human stories and helping people understand how this actually plays out and impacts people. So
And
let's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and this is only my experience, I can't speak for everybody out here and Southern Oregon or Northern California parts. Like that's
Right.
it's just my one experience, so it's
Totally.
subjective for sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about as we kind of wind down on the interview. And once again, shout out to all of our live viewers today. We've had MacBuds, Crazy Pot Mom, Gina, have all been hanging out today, so we appreciate them. Nahey, they've all been hanging out today in our live chat on CannaBuzz.
Thanks,
Um,
guys.
but so shout out to our CannaBuzz supporters. And once again, if you want to be joining us on our live streams where we do these interviews on Sundays, you can join us by joining the Cannabis Community. And don't forget to use the code New Year for 50% off. But before we go, I had a last couple questions. First one was, what are you hopeful for in the year 2023? Maybe make a prediction, but yeah, what do you think is coming up this year, basically?
I'm hoping to see supply and demand level out a little bit, right,
Yeah.
everyone? It seems, overall, like people do seem way more positive about 2023. It's just we got to learn how to we pivoted a little bit and it seems like it's up from here. I don't think it's going to come back and rebound to what it was before, but definitely seems to be starting out better. I also am hopeful to see more craft cannabis actually come to fruition, being plugged into Southern Oregon. It seems like, there are more cultivators that are focusing on growing that craft just because of the market demands, right? It seems like people are wanting better tasting weed again, as far as the consumers go. And, I'm really excited to see what happens with this Southern Oregon Family Farms Cooperative that Aaron's doing. Like, that's something I'm really looking forward to see play out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope to maybe get down there and visit them at some point. It'd be great to get down there because I'm up in Northern Oregon and I've really never been down to Southern Oregon or even seen any of that cannabis community. So it'd be nice
Take a trip.
to
Yeah.
We should plan a
be
trip.
nice to come
Should make
down.
that happen. Yeah.
I'm ready. So go ahead and let us know. Let all the people know where they can find you, where they can find Mammoth Microbes and all that fun stuff. Where are we going to see you at, Josie?
All right, y'all. Well, not too many events coming up like immediately in the super near future, but I'm on Instagram at mammoth_Josie. That's Josey, like the outlaw. And then our main account is Mammoth Microbes with an E, not that dude that doesn't have an E who's trying to be us. It's a fake account. On LinkedIn and Facebook, we're just Mammoth, just straight up Mammoth. And our website is mammothmicrobes.com. I also would like to plug in Aaron Getty. They are Southern Oregon. Hang on, let me find their website real quick. I had all of this.
No worries. And we also had a question in chat, I guess, before you went. MacBuds was asking when to use Mammoth P in soil. So before you go, I guess we'll look for a grow tip on Mammoth too. On
When to use it in soil?
yeah. When are they using it in flower, veg, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so with whatever media you're using, you want to use it the whole way through. Like I said, the P stands for phosphorus. Ask yourself, when is phosphorus valuable? It's valuable the whole life cycle. I promise you, if you use it in early root production, you're going to see bigger roots and faster roots. I mean, that's normally what happens in my experience. It's very consistent. phosphorus is integral to root production, so especially if you're using a propagating routine that involves a little bit of phosphorus input in there as well. And then you had some Mammoth P. So I said earlier, plants normally have about a 20% availability to phosphorus. With Mammoth, they have closer to 80% availability, which is huge. So you can also cut back on your phosphorus inputs a little bit if you're using full strength phosphorus and bloom inputs when you're adding Mammoth P, because it's providing so much extra availability. And then during veg, what you're going to see, what our peer-reviewed data has concluded, is that there's about a 6% increase in the stalk and the branch strength. So you're going to have bigger branches to support that increased weight. So especially if you're doing, big outdoor plants or something, like it's very valuable to use during that time, because it's going to give you sturdier branches. So your branches are less likely to break from the 20% increase in yield you get on the buds. Does that answer that question? I hope so.
Think so. Yeah. And then you wanted to give a shout out to Southern Oregon Family Farms. It was sofamilyfarms.com, right? That was the site that you were looking for. Yeah.
And then another misconception with Mammoth P is that you have to use it every single watering or feeding. So base recommendation is at least get it in there once a week at that 0.6 milliliters per gallon of water. That's just the base. And then, you can tweak it however you want, but you don't have to use it every day or every feeding.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm not sure if you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the different products, but I do like that your guys' stuff is concentrated, right? So I'm not using like 3 fluid ounces per gallon or something crazy. So I'm just like burning through bottles of liquid,
Yeah, it goes into like my experience coming into sales with a company who is just starting out, though. Like there's so much re-education that went into that, because people are like, why am I going to pay this amount of money for this gallon when I can get this 5 gallon for the same price? And I'm like, well, did you see how many gallons that this feeds versus that?
Right.
It's just a hard thing for people to wrap their mind around. Like we're so used to like more is more, so I have to constantly like explain how concentrated it is, and that's why it's so expensive. It's really not. If we had made it less concentrated, it wouldn't be as expensive as people think it is. It'd be like the same price as everything else. It's just there's so much like extra steps that go into being a part of a
Adding
company
water.
that's trying to put new products out there. We have to a lot of education. Yeah,
and I think one of the, like we touched on earlier, is a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I got plenty of phosphorus in my nutrient mix, but it's the point that you're making the phosphorus available.
They can't access it though.
Can have,
yeah.
And the other thing I also want to, before we end, I also use maybe 3/4 of what the recommendations are for my nutrients. I use way less than I have to, because I know that the microbes that I use, bacterias and fungi, are going to be making stuff available at a higher rate. And so I don't have to hammer it. And I never use NPK over 10, because I'm not trying to destroy everything in there that's living.
Right.
So I run low NPK. I run maybe 3/4 strength. And I've been doing that I've been rocking Mammoth P for 5 years at least, at least. I mean,
you've been around longer than I have.
Yeah, we we go way back, and I was really want to you. Yeah, I really want to say I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate all the opportunities that you've provided for us, and all the swag. That's another thing we really didn't talk about.
I know.
Is how brilliant Mammoth is at swag and branding.
Yeah.
Your stuff
got some new stuff out.
Nice.
And when you guys came out with
itching for a flat or not flat bill, we have these ones out now. So all I need from you is like some sort of customer testimonial to your favorite Mammoth product. And these are limited, so there's only so many that we have. But cool. for the first handful of folks who can get something like that our way. Gosh,
That's rad.
And
That's
thank you for
rad.
mentioning
Beautiful.
being able to, you know, come back on your bloom inputs a little bit and your nutrients a little bit. That's something that's like anecdotal. We don't have a lot of research on that yet, other than stuff that's anecdotally from our customers. So I appreciate like you sharing that, because it's something from a company standpoint. We can't give an official, like, you can cut back 2/4 amount. All I can tell you is that you can cut back, so for you to do that. Yeah.
Very
And
cool.
if you have any doubts, you can check out my YouTube channel. I document every grow. And like I said, I've been using Mammoth for probably 5 years or more. So go check it out.
Yeah. Huge shout out to Mammoth Josie. We really appreciate her time this afternoon and really learning everything about all the different stuff. Like JR said, we've been using Mammoth products for years. I was so stoked when CannControl came out, because I love the brand and I really trust you guys. Like you said, Josie, you have a science-based approach. It's not bro science or some other BS. It's actual, based on results. And so I was stoked when CannControl came out, and then I could use it inside and outside and all these different scenarios, and it helped me in so many different ways. So huge shout out to Mammoth. Make sure to check them out on all the different sites and links and social things that we plugged earlier. Make sure to follow Josie, Mammoth_Josie, right, on Instagram.
Appreciate it.
And huge shout out to all of our viewers right now on the live stream. We appreciate you guys. Once again, check out the Cannabis Community in the App Store or on the website, CannaBuzz.app. And then also thank you to TikiMadMan.com for helping support our show and help it make possible for us to attend different festivals and host this show online and all that good stuff. And a new shout out this week was KingKongClones.com. KingKongClones.com. Gotta enunciate on that one.
KingKongClones.com.
Yeah, I gotta enunciate on
That's
that.
it.
Well, thanks everyone. We hope you have a great afternoon, a great week, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace all.
Thank you guys. Cheers.
Growers love.